Dozens of churches were vandalized and burned to the ground last year alone in Canada. Do you consider these to be acts of terrorism?
Minister, we've heard from a number of witnesses, from our security forces, from law enforcement, from academics, that the greatest threat from an ideologically motivated violent extremism perspective that Canada faces is from the far right, from white nationalists.
Minister, again, I just want to give you an opportunity to acknowledge that there seems to have been a failure in your department to take the Coastal GasLink pipeline seriously. Can you point to any measure that you have done to show the public that you're taking this seriously?
Minister, the shooting in Buffalo, motivated by the Great Replacement theory.
Minister, on May 2nd, you stated in the House of Commons, quote, "On the recommendation of law enforcement, we invoke the Emergency Act," end quote. Given new evidence from the RCMP Commissioner and the Ottawa Chief of Police that they did not ask you to invoke the Emergencies Act, do you still stand by your statement? Yes or no?
I do, Mr. Lloyd, because as you heard from Commissioner Lucky, there was consultation, including seeking advice on the powers that were included in the Emergencies Act. It was necessary. It kept Canadians safe, and we stand by that decision.
Thank you, Minister. My next question. Dozens of churches were vandalized and burned to the ground last year alone in Canada. Do you consider these to be acts of terrorism?
Mr. Lloyd, I think you would know from me and from our government that we stand against all forms of violence, and where appropriate and whenever necessary, we will continue to condemn that form of violence.
Minister, the definition of terrorism in Canadian law states that a terrorist act is one that is used to intimidate for political, ideological, or religious purposes, and can include significant damage to property. Do you consider the complete destruction of churches across Canada last year to meet the definition in Canadian law of a terrorist act? Yes or no?
Mr. Lloyd, you will know from previous testimony that I have extensive experience prosecuting terrorism. I'm familiar with the definition, and of course, where violence is informed by a political, ideological, or religious motivation, that it can be prosecuted, but of course those decisions are up to police to take independently. Regardless, I condemn that kind of violence, and I think all reasonable and fair-minded Canadians would.
Okay, Minister. Can you tell the committee, are you familiar with the following quote? Quote, "Bring forward measures to counter the rise of ideologically inspired violent extremism and strengthen the capacity of Canadian police and prosecutors to bring to justice cyber criminals and terror suspects to the fullest extent of the law."
Of course I am. Yes.
What is it from?
The mandate.
It's from your mandate letter. I'm glad you know your mandate letter. That's very reassuring. What are you doing to ensure that the suspects, the hate crime suspects who destroyed these churches, are brought to justice to the fullest extent of the law?
Well, first, I think we need to go back to an important principle in our democracy, which is that we, as parliamentarians, write laws, we create policies to address ideological extremism, but we place our confidence in law enforcement to apply those laws, to investigate, and to prosecute independently, Mr. Lloyd. And I would think that you would agree that we ought not to be
certainly, Minister, but your mandate
not to be
letter,
going into that function.
Your mandate letter says you need to strengthen the capacity of police to bring these criminals to the justice to the fullest extent of the law. I'm asking you, what are you doing to give prosecutors and the police the tools to bring the church-burning suspects to justice?
Well, first, we have strong laws on the books, as we've pointed out, to ensure that criminals are brought to justice, especially those who commit crimes on the basis of the religious, political, and ideological motivations. But secondly, we're also continuing to invest in law enforcement, providing them with additional resources.
Is there an investigation into these church burnings? Is there an investigation continuing?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Are you aware if there's an investigation into these church burnings continuing?
Well, Mr. Lloyd, again, as I've said on a couple of occasions, investigations are carried out independently by law enforcement.
But you're not aware if there's an investigation or not?
I believe that questions around investigations are best directed to law enforcement.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, an attack against one community of faith in this country is an attack against all communities of faith. Some national security experts who have come before this committee have stated that certain extremists, particularly those that attack pipelines and burn down churches, are acting with impunity because they don't believe that your government will go after them. What do you have to say to that from national security experts?
Well, as a parliamentarian, as a responsible parliamentarian, Mr. Lloyd, I hope you would discourage them from believing that. I would hope that you would say that we are united as parliamentarians in stamping out any kind of ideological...
These are national security experts that are saying These people are acting with impunity because they don't believe that your government's going after them. What is your government going to do to ensure that these extremists know that they will face the consequences?
We'll call it out. We'll support law enforcement so that they can bring those criminals to
Did
justice.
you make a statement about the churches that were burned down last year?
Mr.
Did
Lloyd,
you call
if
it
you
out,
were,
Minister?
Mr. Lloyd, if you were listening carefully to my testimony, I just condemned that form of
But
violence
last
right
year,
now.
when it happened, did you call it out at the time?
Mr. Lloyd, we'll always condemn that form of violence.
Okay, but you can't say if you called it out on my time. In my community, Indigenous, Cree, and Métis, along with Franco-Albertans and Catholics, were devastated by the destruction of the iconic St. Jean-Baptiste Church in Morinville, and we hope that you will work harder to bring justice to these committees. My final question, numerous witnesses and studies have indicated that foreign interference played a significant role in several constituencies leading to the defeat of incumbent candidates in the 2021 election. CSIS's recent 2021 report cites numerous examples of foreign interference in Canada and a risk to our elections, but it makes no mention of the 2021 election. Do you believe that foreign interference had an impact on the election results in some ridings in the last election?
Well, again, I will leave it to the service to comment on foreign interference with respect to their expertise. But I will tell you that we together need to be very much on high alert against foreign interference.
But you've received
including,
briefings, Minister. Did they tell you that there was foreign interference in the election?
Mr. Lloyd, if I could just be permitted to finish
20 seconds.
my response. What I was saying was that I think we collectively need to be very vigilant and on high alert against foreign interference, including as it relates to our democratic institutions, which obviously includes elections. And we need to be sure that as we are on alert, that we are having very rigorous discussions
10
with
seconds,
our national
please.
security partners to make sure they have the tools that are necessary to protect against that threat to our national security.
All right. Thank you. Minister, we've heard from a number of witnesses from our security forces, from law enforcement, from academics, that the greatest threat from an ideologically motivated violent extremism perspective that Canada faces is from the far right, from white nationalists. Would you agree with this assessment?
I would, and just yesterday I made a number of statements condemning the recent acts in Buffalo as being an act of white supremacy and anti-black racism. But the point I would just highlight, Mr. Noor Mohammed, as I think your question strongly implies, that we are not immune in Canada from either racism or hate, and together we have work to do, which I hope will be advanced by the good work of this committee.
Minister, again, I just want to give you an opportunity to acknowledge that, there seems to have been a failure in your department to take the Coastal GasLink pipeline seriously. Can you point to any measure that you have done to show the public that you're taking this seriously?
Ms. Dancho, respectfully, you've said now on a couple of occasions that my officials don't take this seriously. That's wrong.
And why is it then that they were not able to tell me and members of this committee when they're invited here to talk about extremism that they were not following this case? Why is that?
I think rather what they are attempting to respect is the independence of law enforcement in carrying out investigations, which we all should be very cautious about commenting on. And it's not a lack of attention. It's rather wanting to respect that police are the ones who are best positioned to answer your questions. And I, by the way, agree you have every right and should be asking them. I would just simply encourage you to direct those questions to the police of jurisdiction. They're best situated to answer those questions.
Minister, the shooting in Buffalo, motivated by the great replacement theory, where the shooter, he published his manifesto and really personally thought that the Anglo-Saxon race was being replaced through immigration policies and all kinds of racist garbage. Where did he find that? Where was he exposed to it? Online, through a very toxic ecosystem in echo chambers. Pat King, one of the lead organizers of the convoy, was spouting off the same garbage, live streaming on social media. Yep. And so, back then we might have just passed it off as the ranting of an individual. And one of your officials during our IMVE study said a lot of what you see on the internet is awful, but it's lawful. So I understand there's a very fine balance here. But at the same time, it can have very real and devastating consequences. So, Minister, my question to you in the minute and a half that I have left is, social media companies, they've come before this committee, they've told us that they have very robust terms of service. those terms of service are failing. It's quite apparent they're failing. What are your thoughts? What is your government's approach going to be on holding social media companies accountable for their terms of service so that they are actually enforced? I understand it's a very fine line between protecting our charter rights of freedom of expression, but at the same time, what people are being exposed to online it has led to some very tragic consequences. And I just want to have your thoughts, Minister, on how your government is approaching this very real problem.
My thoughts are as follows. Words matter. Hate can lead to violence. The Great Replacement Theory is a conspiracy that is being driven by white supremacists and that is leading to violence, not only in Buffalo, but in Canada. And we all have to be vigilant, not only within government, but right across society, including working with social media. You're right. They have policies. You've seen me in the past call out where I don't think that they're living up to those policies, particularly on Twitter. But we have to do this work together. We have to stamp out hate. We have to stamp out racism. And we've got to be sure that we're putting in place the tools that are necessary to prevent these crimes, these awful crimes, from occurring in the first place. And I'm committed to doing that work with this committee and all parliamentarians.